Okay, and welcome to Unit 4 of OnlinePHPClass.com. And in this unit, we're going to talk about control structures and conditionals. So, why control structures and conditionals? Well, programs are told what to do by the programmer. And in an effort to control the flow of the program, in other words, what to do and when and how to do it, control structures and conditionals are needed. Some of you may know of control structures and conditionals as loops or if statements. So let's talk about loops, control structures loops. So loops are used to get a certain action to repeat until a desired end state or exit condition is met. The if statement is used to check for conditions to determine how to proceed. And loops have embedded if statements, which we'll see coming up. So first loop we'll talk about is the while loop. The while loop is the simplest type of loop in PHP. And it has a couple of different formats. The first one is you can just use while and then in parentheses put the expression followed by statement. And of course, you can put parentheses or braces rather around blocks of statements to create an entire while loop statement. Basically, as we talked about before, it's important to know in PHP what constitutes a statement. So you can put braces around statements inside the while loop to essentially open and close the while loop. You also have an alternative format where you can do while. I'm pretty sure that should be a lowercase w there, so forgive me on that. You could do while expression colon statement 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 and then end while semicolon. You could do it that way as well. Here's an example from php.net. Example 1 uses while loop, and as we see, we do use braces around it in this particular case. So it starts a counter of $i equals 1, does while $i is less than or equal to 10, echo $i plus plus. So in PHP there is a plus plus version. You could in other words you could echo $i equals $i plus 1. But basically in PHP you have a plus plus version where you can do $i plus plus or plus plus $i. The key here is, like what the comment says, the printed value would be $i before the increment, i.e. post increment. Okay, so what you're going to get is basically the printed value would be $i before the increment. So what you'll see for the counts is we can do this here. I'll show it to you. All right, let me bring up the dev PHP here. And let's get rid of all of this from last unit. Let's say we have $i equals 1 while $i is less than or equal to 10. Echo $i plus plus. Okay. And what you get is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You get the value before the actual increment. Okay. That's called a post increment, meaning you're going to increment after you echo the value. Okay. If you put the plus plus I, you'll be incrementing before. So if we did plus plus, you'll actually get 2 through 10. Should be 2 through 10. Or 2 through 11, sorry. And the reason why it's 2 through 11 is because you're going to, so it says when $i equals 10, it'll say, is $i less than or equal to 10? Yes. Okay, echo plus plus $i, which means echo, $i plus 1 first, so make it 11, and then print it out. Whereas the other one says print it out, and then make it 11. Okay? So, and the second example is the exact same thing. except two different things. One, it uses the second variation of while, and it does the incrementing outside of the echo. Okay. Next, we have the do while loop. The do while loop is very similar to while loops, except the truth expression is checked at the end of each expression, except at the beginning. Okay, so basically, there's one syntax. You can set $i equals 0. You can do something like do echo $i, and then at the end, while $i is greater than 0. Okay, so basically, $i is not greater than 0 initially, but it should be incremented. I'm actually rather surprised there's no increment in here. That doesn't seem to work. Let's do something like set $i equal to 0, do we'll do echo $i plus plus while wondering if that'll work. Yep. So in this particular case, you're going to echo $i plus plus, and while $i is less than 10. Okay. So you get 0 through 9. Now if I set this to 10, we do get 10. And the reason why we get 10, even though this says while $i is less than 10, is because the do statement portion of the do while loop is executed first. Okay? That's different than a while I less than 10. If we just did while I less than 10, nothing would echo because I equals 10. Okay? It's not less than 10, it is 10. In a do while loop, you're executing the do block, then you're checking the while. Okay? The for loop uses three expressions as in this example. For, expression 1, semicolon, expression 2, semicolon, expression 3, and then it's followed by statements. Alternatively, you could do for expression 1, semicolon, expression 2, semicolon, expression 3, statement, 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 end for, semicolon. Of course, you can put braces around statements just like we saw in the while and do while loops. Okay, and what these expressions mean is expression 1 is evaluated once unconditionally at the beginning of the loop, usually initializing an iterator. Expression 2 is evaluated at the beginning of each iteration. If expression 2 is true, the nested items are then executed. If it's false, the loop exits. Expression 3 is evaluated at the end of each iteration. So basically, any of the expressions can be empty or comma separated. If expression 2 is comma separated, the result is taken from the last item in the list. Expression 2 empty means the loop runs indefinitely, and that's helpful when you want to use break statements, which we'll cover later. Note, instead of having a function call in expression 2, use an assignment statement with a function call so that the function doesn't have to be evaluated with each iteration. This is just a tip I'm tossing out there for you from a performance perspective. Rather than doing something like for $i equals 0, do while $i is less than my SQL numbers QR, iterate $i, use $i equals 0, do while I is less than $nr equals MySQL numbers QR, iterate $i. This basically will cover when we get to MySQL. But basically, the MySQL numbers function counts the number of rows in a result. For the QR, I abbreviated query result, which is what you get when you run a MySQL underscore query. And nr I'm using for number of rows. So what happens is the first example, PHP would iterate through the loop and it would be evaluating MySQL numbers QR every single time. Every single time you iterate through the loop. It's counting the number of rows in the query result every single time. The second one, the first time it runs, it says, give me the number of rows in the query. I'll set that to value of $nr. Okay? The second time I come through the for loop, I'm just going to do while $i is less than $nr, because nr is already set. And it saves performance by a factor of the total number of times that you're iterating through the loop. So given this for loop, the way I personally write this for loop is saying, for the way that I've written it here, for I equal to 0, do while I is less than 10, I plus plus, or iterate I. Okay, I equals I plus 1, same kind of thing. What you realize is expression 2 can be treated like a do while loop. Okay, again, for I equals 0, do while I is less than 10, I plus plus. Okay, the middle part, expression 2, can be treated like a do while loop. Here's the for loop from PHP.net. Okay, a couple of different examples. The break basically says at that point when that condition is met, come out of the loop. Okay, because if you notice in the second example, expression 2 is missing, which means the loop would run indefinitely. So you can use the break statement there. Example 3, all 3 conditions are not provided. Okay, so there's nothing to do initially, there's nothing to do from a do while check, which means it'll run indefinitely, and there's nothing to do after, which means you also have to iterate inside the loop. You have to have a break, because you have to have a way to come out, okay, and you have to have an iterator, which you have the $i plus plus at the bottom. Okay, for the most part, you'll probably be dealing with example 1 style. Example 4 style is to show you how you can have a list of statements for the different expressions. There's statement, comma, statement, comma, statement, semicolon for each expression 1, expression 2, expression 3. So you can do multiple things at the beginning of the loop, multiple things at the end of the loop, at the end of each iteration. Okay, and you can also do multiple things in the middle from do while perspective, but remember expression 2 evaluates to the last item if you're going to use multiple statements in expression 2. Alright, next we move on to my favorite loop in PHP, and that is the for each loop. The for each loop is used to iterate over arrays easily. Okay, there are 2 syntaxes available. You have for each array expression as value, followed by statement. You also have for each array expression as key, pointing to value, followed by statements. So basically you have the option of getting the values of the array, so you can iterate over the values. You can also iterate over the array elements where you have both the key and the value. We have access to both the key and the value. So this is extremely helpful. You don't have to use all those get values, get keys, the functions that get the values and keys. You don't have to use all of them and then write a for loop over them. I mean, you can, but I mean, that's essentially what the for each loop does. So the for each loop is very, very helpful. So remember that reset, the function reset, resets the internal array pointer to the array's first element. Okay, you don't need to reset before for each because the internal array pointer is reset with the for each. Okay, that basically means that when you do a for each, no matter what the internal pointer is that PHP uses for the array, wherever it's pointing to, whatever element it's pointing to, it is reset. So when you iterate using a for each loop, you are getting the array from the very, very first element. Okay. You should, however, do a reset after using a reference to the array in PHP 5. So if you are passing by reference or using some sort of array reference, you should do a reset so that you reset the pointer back to the first element. Alright, so here's an example from php.net. $r equals array 1, 2, 3, 4 for each array as value by reference, value equals value times 2. Okay, what this actually is doing, since you are using value by reference, that's what the ampersand means, you're actually changing, if you do value equals value times 2, you're literally changing the values in the array. Okay, so what it says, the comment says array is now array 2468. Okay, you can then unset value, okay, which breaks the reference, okay, with the last element, because if you don't unset a reference like that, you have a tendency, the value will actually have a reference still to the last element. So in other words, you're doing array 1, 2, 3, 4 by reference, value will hold a reference to 4, and then once value equals value times 2 runs, it'll hold a reference to that 8 in the last element. So array index 3, okay, 0, 1, 2, 3. It'll hold a reference to array index 3 unless you unset it. Okay, so that clears the reference. So if you're wondering how you can double an array, like multiply every element by something, or how to make changes to every element in an array, you can do a for each loop. You can also, if you're just interested in the values, obviously you don't need to do by reference. You can literally then use the 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you just wanted to print out the values times 2, you could just do for each $r as $value with no ampersand, and then echo $value times 2. Okay. Now the if statement. We're going to get into the if statement. The if statement is very important because it allows for conditional execution of code fragments. One way to use the if statement is if expression followed by statements. Okay. You don't need braces, so if you're just running one individual statement, otherwise put the braces. Okay. Expression is evaluated to its Boolean value, and if expression evaluates to true, the statement is executed. If expression evaluates to false, the statement is ignored. Here's an example. If $A is greater than $B, echo A is bigger than B. Okay. You can have more than one statement executed by grouping with braces, as I mentioned. Okay. If $A is greater than B, echo A is bigger than B, and then it has setting B equal to A. Okay, which if A is greater than B, setting B equal to A would mean that A is no longer greater than B because they're equal. Okay, so the first example, as you see, does not use braces, and it uses one particular statement because the entire if echo is one PHP statement. When you do your if containing multiple statements within it, you have to put the braces around it. Okay, so that's basically how that works. Now, comparing with strings using greater than and less than, that's an interesting exercise. We may talk about it briefly, I'm not sure, but basically you can post in the forum if you have any questions about it, and we can address it there. The if statement continuing. So you can nest if statements indefinitely. Okay, so you can have $x equals 17. If $x is less than 20, do this. If $x is greater than 10, do this. If $x is greater than 15, do this. Echo x is between 15 and 20. Okay, so you can see how that works. And you don't need braces because each subsequent line is actually another statement that requires a subsequent line. So unless you were having multiple statements underneath where the echo is, you wouldn't need braces, and even then you would only need braces underneath the if statement. I find that, under the last if statement, okay, I find that it's helpful to include braces because if you have to go back, it's much easier to already have the braces in place than it is to mess with the formatting. In addition, it's easier to read. Okay. Your style of if you want to put the open brace on the line with the if statement and the closed brace on its own line, or if you want to put this open brace and its closed brace both on its own line, it's up to you. Okay. Using else, else if, and else if with a space. They are different. So basically you have else if is the same as else if, except else if must be used when using the alternative syntax. Okay, so let me repeat that. Else if without the space is the same as else if with the space, except else if without the space must be used when using the alternative syntax. Okay, so here's an example where if A is greater than B, echo A is bigger than B, else if without the space A is equal to B, okay, then echo A is equal to B, else echo A is smaller than B. Okay, that's else if without the space. If we're going to use else if, okay, never mind. We're going to talk about switch next. So basically, go back into if. I was just looking at this because it almost seems like else if with the space must be the one that has to be used with the alternative syntax. So if I do something, if I do if $I is less than 12, else if I want to do it right first, okay? Echo else if, sorry, $I is equal to 10. Oh, that's not actually going to work because the first one's going to Alright, so that should echo, well, that'll just echo 10 is equal to 10 because I didn't do the literal. Okay, I should really have this in single quotes. Alright, now if I change this to space, first of all, let's make sure this works, and it will print the $I. If I put a space here, that should not work. It is going to. Oh my gosh. See, I don't use the alternative syntax. I don't think you need it. That's why what I wrote on the slide didn't seem to make sense initially. What this is saying is you can use else if without the space or else if with the space. However, if you're going to use the alternative syntax, you must use else if without the space. In other words, the else if with the space does not work with the alternative syntax. That's what this is talking about here. Forgive me for that. I don't use the alternative syntax. I'm including it for completeness. To me, it's just more confusing. Like you have these little one-off rules like this. You can use else if without the space or with the space in a traditional if style statement. So just stick with that and you'll be okay. All right, now we'll move on to the switch statement. These two, as it says, are functionally equivalent. Okay, you have if $I equals 0, echo I equals 0. Else if $I equals 1, echo I equals 1. Else if $I equals 2, echo I equals 2. Or switch $I, where you use case statements. Case 0, echo I equals 2, break. Case 1, echo I equals 1, break. Case 2, echo I equals 2, break. The breaks are required because if you don't, what it'll do is it'll actually do each case statement from the first one it matches down to the break. Okay, so if you took out the break in case 0, you would get I equals 0, I equals 1. Okay, in fact, we can. Alright, so case $I. Oh, I'm sorry, switch $I. I gotta do. That's why I was like, didn't make any sense. Alright, switch $I. Case 10. Now I'll put a break. And you'll get I equals 10. Okay. If I take this break out, you'll get I equals 10, I equals 20. Okay? Because it'll run down to the break from the first case it matches. Okay. Alright. You can use strings with the switch statement. So you can do case, apple, bar, cake. Okay? And you don't have to have numbers. Some languages you have to. In PHP you can have strings. You can mix strings with numbers in case statements. Okay, just make sure you quote the strings. Okay, pretty standard. It's not a keyword. It's got to be a string. It's got to be quoted. All right. If you leave a break, oh, here's my comment on leaving the break out. If you leave a break out, statements in subsequent case statements will execute. from php.net. Here, if $I is equal to 0, PHP would execute all the echo statements. If $I is equal to 1, PHP would execute the last two. You'd be getting the expected behavior I equals 2 would be displayed only if $I equals 2. Okay, that should make sense to you now that I gave you that mini demo. Alright, so here's how continue and break work. Continue is used when looping structures to skip the rest of the current loop iteration and continue execution at the condition evaluation and then the beginning of the next iteration. Okay, so you're continuing execution at the condition evaluation and then the beginning of the next iteration. You're literally continuing in your loop. You're just going to the next iteration after your evaluation of your condition, though. Okay. Continue accepts an optional numeric argument which tells it how many levels of enclosing loops it should skip to the end of. That's important because if you are nesting loops, you need to know at what loop do you want to jump to. Okay. Break ends execution of the current for each, while, or do while, or switch structure. Break accepts an optional numeric argument which tells it how many nested enclosing structures are to be broken out of. Same kind of thing. How many, if you're nesting loops, how many loops you want to break out of. Always remember to semicolon with continue. Okay, very important. Here's a continue example. By saying continue 3, you're executing, you're continuing from not from the first while loop. So you have this while loop here, while 1. You also have this while loop here, and you have this while loop here. Continue 3 will continue up to the top while loop. Here's a break example. This shows you break 2, okay, which exits the switch and the while loop, because the break 1 would just exit the switch, and the break 2 would exit the while loop. So here's the break 1 exiting only the switch. Okay, which is the same thing as this. Alright, here is alternative syntax for control structures. PHP.net resource, should you be interested. Of course, it's all one line, and there is a dash between control and structures. Okay. All right. So PHP 5.3.0 plus has a goto. You can do goto structure like this. Let's check. What is our We're using 531, so we have the goto. Okay. All right, demo time. We're going to set the name variable to a name and print hello name only if it is your first name. Okay. So let's do that. Set a name variable equal to, I'm just going to use onlinephpclass.com. Okay. If name equals onlinephpclass.com, oops, print or echo hello name. Okay. We see it prints. If I change onlinephpclass.com to Greg, it does not. Create an array of names and say hello to each of the names. Okay, so we actually did that before, but this time names equal array, Greg, Jen, Cindy, Dan, John, Matt, and say hello to each of the names. Okay. What kind of loop do you think we're going to use? I personally like the for each. So for each array as, and I'll put key value just for the heck of it here. Okay. Echo hello value. And I'm also going to put a break. There you go. Easy. Print hello name 10 times using for and an iterator. Okay, well, let's do this. We already have the for each. I'm just going to wrap this in a for loop. For I equals 0, do while I is less than 10, I plus plus. What do you think? Do we need the braces? Nope, because for each carries with it one extra line. And we're going to echo. We don't need them. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to use them because I want to actually echo time. The actual instance. And then I'll do it 10 times. Syntax error. Alright. Expecting comma or semicolon on line 6. Oh. Okay, so the error was on line 6, it mentioned. But the problem is I forgot the semicolon on line 5. Because the parser actually was saying, well, you're missing a semicolon here. So sometimes when you get a parser, you want to check the line before. All right. 0. I do 0. I really should do. Here. Let's do number. Oh, did I mention that you can also use a hash as a comment? I think you can. Maybe you can't. Hold on a second. Sometimes I get my languages confused too. Let's see what happens. Well, that's going to error. Yeah. Yeah, that works. Alright, so you can use a hash as a comment too. Now, if I want to do $I plus 1, what do you think that's going to print? It's actually going to print 0 plus 1, 1 plus 1. So what do you think you need to do? You need to put, well, you can't really put parentheses, but you can put, and if you can put braces though. No, I lied. The reason why I don't know why it's doing that. I'm just gonna break it out. Okay, some issue with, oh, it's because the variable isn't that. Yeah, this is what I want. Yep. This is what I'm talking about watching me do this live. Switch to parentheses. There you go. Switch to parentheses, and I took it out. Do I need to have it outside of the echo statement? No. So I could have used parentheses, but the trick is to put the parentheses from the left side of the dollar sign. So you're grouping the addition. Nope, that doesn't work. And the reason why is because they're getting evaluated as part of the string. So you literally have to, you do have to break them out. Okay. Well, that's fine as long as it works. What do I do now? Oh, the hash mark has to stay inside. Alright. Alright, so number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Print hello name 10 times using while and an iterator. Alright, so how do we change this to while? Now that'll go on indefinitely unless inside your while loop, you put a I plus plus semicolon. Okay. Same thing. Alright. And that is the demo. The exercises do each of the demos. Here they are for you. And post your questions, comments, concerns, observations, feedback, and anything else that you'd like to share, learnings, experiences, anything you want to tell me. Post that into the forum. Feel free to do the exercises. In fact, do them, please, for your own benefit. And I'll see you in the next unit.